Yep, this is our coffee table, and we love our coffee table because it has the ability of lifting up. The countertop, it's a mess. Tried sanding it, but it didn't quite work. Polyurethaned it. It just made it look worse. So I'm going to try something new. What I'm thinking of doing is routing out the top of this table and putting self-leveling resin on top of it and give it a nice new look. In order to route this out, I'm going to have to make me a jig. So the first step is to measure the width and the length of the table. And then I measure the depth of the table. Well, the jig idea was a total flop, so I had to think of something else. I used my DeWalt saw and I'm cutting grooves like that, and then I'm getting my router and I'm cutting out the pieces. Let's see how this works. First time for everything. Now I'm going to use my sonicator to bring it to the edges where the table saw can't reach. And I found if you just went along the edge like here and cut in, you could chip out pieces along with those lines just like that. It takes a little time, but I'm getting a straight edge. Well, I did it. Routed out all around the edges. Got a nice clean edge there. Now we've got to route out the rest of the table. That's going to be a little easier. I don't have to be so careful. We're going to put shells in here and sand, so it's not going to be really necessary for me to smooth all this out. Our shells can only be so deep. After all, the table is only so thick, so I can only go so deep in this. Tomorrow we'll clean out the rest of this wood and start arranging shells. Well, it's the next day, and I thought that since using the circular saw, cut those edges worked out so well, why don't I just cut lines in the top of this table and see if it makes it easier for me to route this table to one level. Well, we did it. Here's all the pieces come out like little chunks like that. Now we're going to level it out a little bit using planer, and as the bit we used, and a sander. Yeah, and this is how it looks after we used the planer. It just took a few minutes. Planed it all down. Routed out more stuff because I wanted to put in deeper stones, deeper shells. This piece right here, it may be like a 1/4 inch thick, and this is about a 1/2 inch thick. So I'm going to have to do something about getting a piece of wood. The piece of plywood I measure is going to fit into this little square right here. So I'm going to measure this square, give myself maybe a 1/4 inch leeway on each side. Well, I cut that piece out and I attached it on the bottom like that, glued it, and screwed it in from the top. And while I was doing it, I reinforced these supports that holds this table up. And I just threw a coat of golden oak stain all around the edges. Everything is gluing and it's screwed in. And so I'm going to call it a day. Tomorrow I'm going to get some thin set, and that's what I'm going to use to attach all the seashells and stuff like that. Well, it's another day and I'm sorting out shells and sorting out sea glass. And over here, we made 3 levels. And we got a bar, piece of wood like this, and we just slide it across. And if it catches, then it's oops, see? That one's not good, it's too high. That one's going to have to go on that level. Then we're going to put sand on there and get artistic. Probably not going to have them all that clustered, so it just might be enough. I want to give it that feel of the water coming in and then a shell line, you know what I'm saying? Okay, so we covered our tabletop with Quickset, and now we're going to put all these here shells on with my wife. Well, we placed all the shells and all the sea stone and all the rocks and the pebbles, and covered it with the sand, squished it down with a sponge. Put all these shells on, as I showed you before. Just pasted them on using thin set, and now I'm going to mix my epoxy. So I got one of these little containers you get out of the Chinese food place. They give you the soup in a quart container, and I got a coffee cup and I measured 2 equal marks. And then what I did is I put the hardener in first. We're trying this one stuff first, the Promarine. You put an equal amount of the tabletop epoxy on. Yeah, I attached this mixer tool because you want to mix it really good with my drill so I could make it go slow. And then I added sand. after I mix it all up, I got some of this beach sand and I put it in this here container and I mix it up using my tool till it was nice and homogeneous. With my tabletop clamped down so it stays straight, it was sort of warping, so I got these pieces. And then I poured the epoxy sand mixture down. What I'm trying to do here is give the illusion, when it's all said and done, that a wave's coming in, and it's coming over the shells, and it's got sand in it. So then I poured it, and then I sprinkled more sand on top of it to give that feeling that the sand is mixing with the water as it comes to shore. Got to make sure the shoe is warm. So what I did is I got the Eden Pure, and I'm keeping track of, because we want the temperature to be between 75 and 80. And in fact, before you mix this stuff up, you got to make sure this stuff is between 75 and 82. Now I went with this stuff because it's a little less expensive. Is there a difference? I haven't the faintest idea. I never did this before. Oh yeah, by the way, one thing you have to do is after you pour this stuff, you gotta get a torch, or you get, you know, this hot air paint remover type gun, and you blow it over it and you can see all the bubbles just popping. Now it's not so much important right now because, you know, when a wave comes in it bubbles. I didn't really concentrate on getting rid of all the bubbles. Well, it's the next day and this is the result of my tabletop experiment. Epoxy is hardened, it's very hard. And so now we're going to prepare another coat. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another quart of epoxy and continue with this illusion of you see water coming in, like a wave coming in. And you see the difference in color of the sand. Well, this is where I mix the sand with the epoxy, giving it that wet look as the water's coming in, and over here is that dry look. So we're going to continue with that today. You know, you could spend lots of money buying containers to mix your epoxy in, but I got all these tons of these things from the Chinese food place when I buy a quart of soup. So I'm going to get this cup, I'm going to fill it with water, I'm going to make a mark, then I'm going to fill the cup again, I'm going to make another mark. You fill it to the first mark with hardener, and then you fill to the second mark with the resin, and you mix it together. Alright, so there's where my first cup came up to. Yeah, and there's where my second cup came up to. So I empty this thing out and dry it off and bring it downstairs and do the resin. And we have our mixing tool all ready to go. And this one is to do the sides of the container so that it doesn't make bubbles. That's what those holes are for. And we got our epoxy hardener and our tabletop epoxy and our container, our safety glasses. Now we're going to mix this stuff up. That's how it looks like before I mix it. Instead of mixing like I did last time the sand, I put the sand in and then I sprinkle it along this edge. And I used half the epoxy, which is now flowing down like wood water. And I got some more epoxy left. Now I'm going to add that. Here's my sand. And I'm going to add that now to where I applied the sand. When I poured the epoxy resin, I'm just letting it flow out like water. Some places where it stopped, I might help it along with a brush. Epoxy resin does not wash off your brushes. So when you use a brush, make sure it's one a cheap one, you know, one that you don't mind if you lose it. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to get the blower, this baby, and I'm going to blow out bubbles. Now there you go. That's my second coat. Last time using sand. Things that I would do differently. First of all, let's do this another time. When I use my trowel, put down the glue. I used the part with the teeth. I wouldn't do that. I just used the flat part. This way you get a look more like sand. Though my wife says it looks like raked sand. Now the next time I come here, I'm going to really use a lot of the resin this time. So I got to get me a big container. Like that looks like half a gallon's left, because I already used little less than 2 quarts. And then we're going to do what they call it's a flood coat. And we're going to throw the whole thing in, and I guess it's going to take me up, well, no, pretty close to the top. Well, we're back and everything dried really nice. My wife, she marked these 2 containers. I couldn't find a big one, so I'm just going to do 2 quart containers and do my flood coat that way. And if you do it like within 4 to 6 hours from each other, then you don't even have to sand it. You just pour it right on top. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to pour these two, and then I'm going to come back a little later today and I'm going to do another 2 coats. Oh, there we go. This is a little less than a half a gallon, the epoxy resin. Mixed and poured, and then we blew the bubbles out using our heat gun right here. This is what I use. You know, it gives a safe heat. You know, it torches. I don't know, it might burn it. Now we're going to come back at about 6 hours, and we're going to give this another flood coat. Now, I'm hoping I got enough epoxy resin to do this. Well, here we are. Still got a bunch of pouring to do. This is going to take more epoxy than I thought. But what I had this idea. Get some pictures and shrink them down and make them black and white. Then burn the edges. Place them in between coats. And this is what it looks like. To give that appearance like maybe they were on a fire somewhere and they washed ashore. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put another big layer over this. Almost a gallon worth of the stuff. And I might just make some more pictures and place them on top of that when it gets tacky to give it more depth, that feeling of deepness, like floating on water and sinking into water. Now I tell you, you can spend a lot on epoxy. But I did my research on eBay and searched around, and one epoxy I'm noticing is just like the next. They're all the same. So you could spend up to $120, $130 for a gallon of epoxy. Or you could spend $48 like I just did. And use that $48 a gallon epoxy and fill this whole thing up. Oh yeah, and the other thing is you have to make this table absolutely level at this stage. So you shimmy it, and this is self-leveling stuff. So if it's not level, it's going to spill off the edge. You don't want that. Well, welcome back. I had to go through a whole lot of these. 4 gallons altogether, but the end result was this. I had to keep pouring it, letting it harden and pouring it, but the last time I just did it, I got a brush and I brushed the edges. It took about a half a gallon. Brushed the edges, and then I poured a thin coat and brushed it out. Right now it's still tacky, and this is the finished product. You have to understand that it takes time to dry and it drips, as you can see on the floor. And what I do is I get a stick and I rub it along the edges underneath as it drips. See, like this. Just rub it along and you scrape off those drips before they get hard, and then they're hard to take off. And all the pictures I put in after each coat, after I pour a half a gallon or 3/4 of a gallon, I'll put another picture on top, you see? And it gives that dimensional look to it. And I put that crucifix in like when it was halfway up, and it looks like it's floating on the water. So you get the water effect. Now I see things I could do differently, and I would if I could. I'm thinking about doing this kind of work on the side now. Well, the project's done. The base part, I just threw a little coat of stain on it and another coat of satin polyurethane just to cover the scratches of the restored piece. That's the story of fire off on shore, and all these pictures from somebody's picture album got burnt and washed ashore. And what it is just pictures of me and my family. And that's what we got. Come here.
Wow.